highest-end diving watch Casio produces and the best functional analog diving watch in the world. These, along with the analog frogman, are the first analog diving watches ever to have radio wave reception and Bluetooth. This watch is the very first Oceanus luxury diving ISO compliant watch. Casio does not have any real competitors in their game. What you will get in this watch, you will not find anywhere else. In fact, diving watches with radio wave capabilities are almost non-existent, making this Oceanus the most accurate luxury diving watch in the world. This is the Oceanus catalog. Reference OCW-P2000. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about the perks of this watch. All Oceanus have special quartz movements. They're all 100 in-house, movements that are tested and proven to be extremely reliable. These are very well-made movements integrated with G-Shock technology, making these movements incredibly robust and reliable. One of the things that makes them so robust is how they are made. The strategic selection of materials with different weights and densities are selected to be assembled in sequence along with other G-Shock technology. These movements have a laser readjustment system. It means that after a shock or really strong magnetism, if the hands get out of position, you don't need to go to a watchmaker to open it up and align the hands. This watch does it autonomously. They have great specifications like solar recharge, atomic timekeeping, Bluetooth, perpetual calendar, so the date will change instantly and will never be wrong, etc. Having that said, the movement in this watch is the 5624 movement, which is a different version from the movement you find on the new analog frogman, a high-end G-Shock. It is a higher grade module than the movement you find on the OCW-100. This is a high-speed multi-motor movement that has finer gear trains with a bigger number of indentations in the gears, making the movement of the hands to look smoother as the hands move around when you go through the modes and functions. For example, if you notice on this Oceanus, the minute hand moves every 10 seconds. Well, on this Oceanus, the minute hand makes smaller moves every 5 seconds. So these hands will move faster and smoother. All Oceanus are made in the Yamagata production line, which is a totally different factory, kind of what Grand Seiko does with Seiko, which only exclusive skills testing medalists within Yamagata Casio Japan are allowed to work. The quality control technology and standards here are so high. Everybody in this production line wear completely sealed customs to avoid any particle to get in the watch. This is how far they can go in here, and all the watches are made in very small numbers a year, similar to Grand Seiko, which is a lot less number of watches produced than Rolex or Omega, let's say. Having this in mind and giving it the importance and value that it should have, let's start with the measurements. It's a 45mm diameter, a 50mm lug to lug, a whopping 17mm thickness, and a 22 lug width. So how does it wear, you might think? It's a big watch. It reminds me of the Grand Seiko Divers High Beat Special Edition, but it works better than, let's say, the Orient Triton. The shape of the lugs makes it more wearable, as they are short in relation to the case and they go down. Guys, I have a 5.5 inches in circumference wrist. I assure you that despite of its big size, you can probably pull it off. Let's talk materials. It is a high-intensity titanium case with a carbide coating, making it very scratch resistant. This titanium is lighter but stronger than steel. Plus, it's incredibly corrosion resistant and warm. It is finished with the Salus polishing, or Saratsu if you say it in Japanese pronunciation, which is the same technique Grand Seiko uses on their watches, which is super well finished. It has faceted cuts on the case, alternated satin and polish. Because this case is high intensity titanium, which is harder and stronger than stainless steel, this kind of work on the case requires more effort and time. This case design has an Oceanus DNA. If you compare it to my OCW-S100, you'll notice the design language with both of these watches are very similar. Look at the shape of the lugs and the structure. Definitely something I like, as it gives this watch a strong identity and talks good about the time being put into the design and concept of this Oceanus. It's a similar thing happening with Grand Seiko. Other watches have a certain Grand Seiko case design DNA, and so these Oceanus have a defined Oceanus original case design. It has 3 buttons, one big rectangular on this side and the octagonal on the other sides. We have a Sine Crown that, by the way, feels of great quality when you pull it out, and the thread feels smooth when you screw it back in. Going to the pushers, if you notice, these pushers seems to have screw down slips being a diver, but actually they are not screwable. All buttons in this watch have the frogman technology that enables these buttons to be 100% safely pushable underwater under pressure. I don't know if any other brand has achieved this technology, but as far as I know, Casio is the only one to achieve this. Many people say G-Shocks are well built, so well built, and thanks to their triple seal on the buttons, you can press the buttons underwater. The Golf Master, for example, on top of that, has a certain technology design that improves the water resistance on the buttons, but for the Frogman, being a full ISO diver, has a different mechanism to make the buttons totally waterproof. They all survive underwater button pressing, but of all Casio's technology, this and the Frogman have the most robust technology to enable button operation. Casio manuals specifies to not press the buttons underwater on their regular G-Shocks, and on the Frogman and this watch they specifically say this watch is totally safe to press the buttons underwater. I know they even pass a rigorous test when they are built solely to check the buttons underwater. That being said, the crown must be screwed in, as water might come inside if the crown is left open underwater. Talking about water resistant, going to the case back, first of all, look at the finishing, oh my goodness. But this is not a screw-in case back. Instead, to ensure water resistance, this time they decided to use not 4, but 8 special screws. If you've seen other brands doing this, please let me know in the comments. In the case back, we have engraved all this type of information and logo. Because we already here, let's check this strap. Now this strap is made from Casio's proprietary Durasoft fluoro rubber, which is allegedly more durable but softer at the same time. Let me tell you, in my experience with all materials I've seen in rubber and silicone straps, this strap material is the very best. Number 1, it's just so high quality. The silicone on the buttons is nice, but it's not as good as this. Also, let's check the silicone on Seiko diving straps. The Seiko is super good, but not as good as this strap. These Seiko straps can sometimes attract lint, dirt, and fabric materials. This Oceanus strap is better for that. The buckle is titanium, super well made with a very well made double deploying clasp. I would have liked to see an extension or micro adjustment mechanism. At the same time, not too much of a problem because you could just open it and switch it to another length. The titanium version bracelet do have diverse extension and some micro adjustments. Going back to the case, let's talk about the bezel. This bezel is awesome. Now, I wish it had numbers marked down on the bezel, but it's okay. This bezel is the most striking diverse bezel you've ever seen. It is an IP iron blue, and they do change in color with the light, and they have really vibrant reflections. It has the sapphire insert, which is even more scratch resistant than ceramic, and the black polish ADLC section of it is super nice. It has this space indentation that makes it look more smooth than the usual diver coin edge bezels, which I like, but I like this one more for one reason. It's a little similar to the Omega C Master finishing. It doesn't have any indentations, but it's smooth, so it just looks a little more refined. It looks smoother, but at the same time it grips very well. Better than the C Master. I've tried C Master bezels, and this one is actually easier to operate. So because it's smooth, it's not gonna rotate easily with surfaces, but it rotates easily with your hand. Now the bezel action on this is really nice. It has a sharp tone to it, but it's smooth at the same time. I'll let you hear it for yourself. It feels similar to Seiko's and Grand Seiko's Bezel Action, but it's different. It doesn't really have backplay. The only downside, if you can ever find in this Bezel Action, is that when you rotate it very slow, it kind of feels a little like there's some titanium on polished surfaces creating a tiny bit of friction. Totally no problem, just something small to notice. Probably this is gonna disappear over time as those surfaces would smooth out naturally with the friction of use. Now, it does have a slightly double dome sapphire crystal, and I love the continuation of the crystal to the sapphire bezel and going smoothly down to the ADLC titanium. It makes a very smooth feeling out of this design. Talking about design, let's take a moment to see the proportions and design of this entire watch. Holy smokes, seriously, this is a badass watch. Very, very well designed. It totally is an Oceanus. You can tell it has the DNA, but it's made into a diver. Hands on the markers are perfectly sized and proportioned. The shape of the hands is great, that by the way are made out of carbon to increase efficiency, being more lightweight and actually stronger, similar to what Grand Seiko did with its quartz diver with titanium hands. But in this case is Casio's technology, because they're developing carbon material, which some people might say is cheap, but it's actually an efficient material. It might look cheap, but it's actually stronger and more durable. The dial of this watch is amazing. The solar panel is dark blue, but you will have no idea there is a solar panel beneath. The hour markers are kind of raised and suspended in the air. Notice also the 12 o'clock marker has a different shape as a reference and easy readability. The crisp and striking blue colors and details on the watch are top notch. So this watch combines the toolness feeling with refinement and luxury, which is something you will only find in this watch among all Casio divers. Now, these complications and sundials here are the same design that you find on the high-end first ever GPS atomic watch in the world, the Oceanus OCW-P2000, which was my very first grail ever. Now, you could say the dial is busy. If you like simple dials, I understand it, that's okay. On the other hand, I personally love this dial design and its finishing. I think it's super cool and very original. You have an asymmetric design with a lot of useful functions that I actually use. I do use a second time zone over here. I do think it's a very useful function for me. And of course, we have another sundial for the modes. We have a home section displaying the time, a second time zone indicating if it's PM or AM on a micro sub dial, a 24 micro sub dial here for the current time, and a date complication, then a tide graph here. This will indicate whether you have a high or low tide, while indicating the time at the port you select. That, by the way, you can change the port through the application. Next is the stopwatch. This sub-dial will go to 0, and as you start the chronograph, you will be able to see minutes and hours on the sub-dial. Of course, it can go out to 12 hours while being able to not lose current time. Next and last, a diving mode. For the diving mode, you have to press and hold this button. Now the sub-dial will show the current time, and the big hands will be your time measurement. As we started, both the hour and minute hands will move together, indicating minutes. This micro sub-dial will indicate 1 hour at the 12 marker and 2 hours on a complete revolution. While you're diving, you have absolute visibility underwater because of a special feature. Let's first go to the Loom, talking about that. The Loom is great. It's even better than the Oris Aquis. Of course, the Loom of the Oris Aquis, it was a little bit of a disappointing being spoiled with Japanese Loom. It is kind of similar to the Oceanus OCW-S100, but I would say it's better. Of course, it covers more areas, so it will be more visible because of that. At the same time, it is not as bright as my Marine Master Professional. This Marine Master is the best Loom I ever seen on a watch, along with other Seamasters. They're just crazy. In any way, no analog divers beat this watch on visibility in the dark thanks to a secret weapon, a camouflage LED light that you press with this button. Alright, let's say you finish your dive and you're going up. Now you hold and press this button, and now it's gonna time your ascent rate. You will know it's tracking your ascent rate because the second hand moves backwards now. Don't worry, the duration of your entire dive is still being tracked after you finish getting to the surface. You simply press and hold this button again and it will display the entire dive. This, along with the rotating bezel and the micro sub-dial tracking hours, make this analog diving watch the absolute best timekeeper when it comes to diving. On top of tracking your dive, you can track a second thing, or if you just rather to use the rotating bezel, that's okay too. Sounds too much? It's like 2 chronometers on a watch, and I personally have used this ability to track 2 separate things. Of course, if I'm tracking one thing with the bezel on a regular diver, I wouldn't be able to track something else on top of it. Also, on regular divers, your limit is 1 hour. Here you have 2 hours, and all that without losing the ability to see the current time. To exit the diving mode, simply press and hold this button, and it will go back to the home screen. Just crazy amazing. I would like to point out how well this watch is designed functionally. See, you don't have to open the crown to set up alarms, countdown timers, etc. In my opinion, it has the perfect amount of selection of functions. You have a second time zone on this dial. For me, this is very useful as I always tend to press buttons on my watches to see another time zone. It is so convenient to be able to see another time zone and see your time zone at the same time without having to scroll through the modes. GMT divers, this goes beyond GMT functionality. It also has some shortcuts with button combinations. For example, let's say you have a sub-dial set for Tokyo, Japan. So you travel to Japan, and once you get there, you don't need to open the crown to change the time. Neither switch the time zones such as what you would do on my OCW-S100, which is already a huge advantage over other watches. You simply press and hold the light button, then the watch will automatically switch your dial's time. Now you have the Japanese time on your main dial, and now you have your home time on the sub-dial. And all this with the correct day and date of the week. Another function to mention is when you're, let's say, in tide mode. And because the hands are obstructing your tide readability, you can press the light and the mode button at the same time. Then the hands will conceal for absolute readability, and after some time the hands will go back to their original positions. Again, is there another analog diver watch that can surpass this watch in functionality, practicality, and reliability? With reliability, I mean that with traditional diving watches, specifically mechanical diving watches, let's say, the date will be wrong eventually because it's not a perpetual calendar. The time will be wrong after some months, by some minutes. You know, the hour will be wrong when there's a switch on daylight saving times. This kind of thing, plus this kind of watch being acquired with the technology of G-Shock, it's absolutely more reliable than, let's say, a Rolex Submariner. You drop a Rolex Submariner through a building, and let's see which one survives. This with other diving analog divers is simply not possible. Of course, excluding the analog frogman. No other diving analog watch can beat this watch until somebody comes up with the similar or better diving functions for an analog traditional watch. Of course, if you bring the digital frogman, then that's another thing. You know, the digital frogman is a beast on its own. Now, the analog G-Shock frogman has been a little bit of a controversy because we had the digital frogman which was better functionally. It has a depth gauge sensor, it was a little smaller, it had a stainless steel case, but for this new technology, I think it's amazing on this Oceanus. Now, there is more functions. Unscrew the crown, pull it out to the first position, you can select the time zone for the sub-dial, meaning your second time zone. Pull it out to the second position, and you can select a different time zone when you travel. Then the hands and the date will automatically adjust. This watch will never be wrong. Daylight savings time? Your Rolex Submariner not only will be a few minutes wrong, it will also be an hour wrong. Not with this watch. It's absolutely reliable. It's probably the most reliable diving analog watch ever made because of that. Every other diving watch from other brands won't have these qualities. Other brands simply don't have the technology to produce this kind of thing, except Seiko and Citizen. But they don't do it right now. Oceanus is the one implementing all these. Imagine you grab the Seiko Astro, which is a GPS atomic signal watch, and you make it into a diver. This is what it is. You can change the time manually or select DST by pulling the crown on the first position, then hold and press the home button, then manually change what you want. To check if the atomic signal was received, press this button, then it will indicate yes or no. You can also perform a manual atomic reception pressing and holding the button until the second hand goes to the RC indicator. This watch connects to the app and displays all kinds of information. To connect this watch to the app, just press and hold for longer until the second hand goes from RC to C. On the app, it has a guide section where you can learn everything about the functions, which is really good. You don't need a manual. A status section where you can see a self-diagnosis. You can also see the power reserve, etc. Then you have a world time section if you don't want to pull out the crown to switch time zones. Then a diving mode with all the records and GPS location of your dives. You can take pictures and videos with your phone and they will be recorded in here. You can also edit and type all the type of information for your records. So that's it. Being a real diver ISO certified, of course, is anti-magnetic. The overall design of this watch, the color combination, the sharpness of the finishing and accents on the dial is really amazing. I think if this watch had some small improvements, it would be a masterpiece. Nonetheless, because of its functionality and reliability, it makes this the best analog diving watch in the world functionally and on the fundamental idea of what's the best watch in the world. What would I change in this watch? I will make it slimmer and smaller first of all. I will make the crown a little bigger. I will also polish the inside of the bezel movement, and that's absolutely it. That way it will be my very most favorite watch ever. The quality of this dial is amazing. The Apply logo. Everything is aligned well. No misaligned chapter rings. Seiko. The finishing of the case, the technology inside, the concept of the brand is so good. I feel the concept of the brand Oceanus fits diving watches a lot. And in my opinion, they could really take over the diving sector with their technology if they wanted.